Kayla was a name whispered in fear across the galaxy. Her reputation had been built over years of silent, calculated kills. She was an assassin, the best the universe had ever known. Every mission she took was completed with deadly precision, and every target she pursued met a swift, silent end. Those who knew her feared her skill, while those who didn't feared the stories that followed her wherever she went. The galaxy was a place of constant war and betrayal. Leaders rose and fell with the shifting tides of power, and in this world, Kayla was a figure of legend. Some said she had never missed a target, that her eyes could see through walls, and her aim was as perfect as a laser. Others said that she could slip through any security, no matter how tight, and leave no trace of her presence. No one knew the truth for sure, but one thing was clear. Kayla was the deadliest assassin the galaxy had ever known. She had worked for powerful governments, influential corporations, and wealthy criminals. Each time, she took on the job with cold professionalism. There were no emotions in her line of work, just targets and contracts. She followed orders, and the galaxy's leaders paid her handsomely for it. The money didn't matter to Kayla. What mattered was the thrill of the hunt, the quiet satisfaction of knowing she could take down anyone, anywhere. But as the years passed, something started to change within her. She had become a weapon, honed and sharpened by countless missions. Her hands were stained with the blood of enemies, allies and innocents alike. She had seen so much violence that it no longer shocked her. It was just part of the job, part of her life. Yet, deep inside, she began to question whether this was all there was. Was she nothing more than a killer, a tool used by others to do their dirty work? One evening, as she sat alone in a small, dimly lit room on a distant planet, she stared at the new contract in her hands. The target was a high-ranking official from the Cylon Empire, a powerful military force that controlled several star systems. It was a big job, one that could solidify her position as the most feared assassin in the galaxy. She knew she could do it. She had done far worse, far more complicated tasks. But as she read the details of the mission, something inside her stirred. The target was a man who had made many enemies, but he was also a man of power and influence. Killing him wouldn't just be another mission. It would send shockwaves through the entire galaxy. And Kayla, for the first time in years, hesitated. Was this the kind of life she wanted? Another contract, another life taken, another round of moving from one target to the next, never stopping, never asking why. For a moment, she thought about walking away, quitting the profession entirely. But where would she go? What would she do with her life if she wasn't an assassin? She had no family, no friends, just a cold, empty void where emotions once had been. With a sigh, Kayla pushed the thoughts aside. She had a job to do. The galaxy needed assassins, and she was the best. She would finish this mission, like all the others, and then move on to the next one. The life she had chosen was dangerous, but it was the only life she knew. There was no room for weakness, no space for doubt. But even as she prepared for the mission, Kayla couldn't shake the feeling that something was changing within her. She had spent years as a ghost, drifting from one job to the next. It was easy to be a ghost when you had no ties to anyone or anything. But now she was starting to wonder if being a ghost was the right way to live. As she sat in the cold, dark room, preparing for the mission, Kayla heard a soft sound outside. At first, she thought it was nothing, just the wind or a distant noise. But the sound grew louder, and she couldn't ignore it anymore. She stood up, her instincts as an assassin kicking in. Whoever was outside, they didn't belong here. Kayla moved quickly, her body silent and precise, as she reached for the weapon hidden beneath her cloak. She glanced out the small window, her sharp eyes scanning the darkness. In the distance, she saw movement, figures approaching in the shadows. They were coming for her. She felt a sudden rush of adrenaline. The target may have been miles away, but now she had a new challenge. She would have to take care of this before she could even think about her next mission. As she prepared herself for another fight, another kill, Kayla couldn't help but wonder, if she survived this, would she feel the same? Would she always be a killer? Or was there something more to her existence, something she hadn't discovered yet? Her thoughts were interrupted by a loud knock on the door. Whoever was out there was getting closer. Kayla was ready. The tension in the room was thick. Kayla could hear the bounty hunters' boots echoing down the hallway, their voices low as they searched the building. They were closing in, getting closer with each passing second. She had to act fast. There was no time to waste. Marcus stood in the corner of the room, his eyes wide with confusion. He had no idea what was really happening, but he could sense the danger. He had never been in a situation like this before, and it was clear to him that the woman before him, Kayla, was no ordinary person. Her calm demeanor, the way she moved with purpose, told him everything he needed to know. She was a fighter, and right now, she was trying to figure out how to survive. "You need to hide," Kayla said, her voice cold but urgent. "Now." Marcus hesitated, his mind racing. He wanted to ask questions, wanted to understand what was going on. But the look in Kayla's eyes told him all he needed to know. This was no time for questions. He nodded quickly and moved toward the closet in the corner of the room. Kayla was already crouching by the window, watching the bounty hunters move below. The sound of their voices grew louder as they searched each room in the building. They were getting closer. Kayla knew her options were limited. She had never been one to rely on anyone, let alone a stranger. But right now, she was outnumbered. She needed to think quickly, and the man, Marcus, was her only chance of getting out of this alive. If he could help her in any way, she would have to trust him, at least for now. "Stay quiet," Kayla whispered, her eyes locked on the street below. The bounty hunters were now just outside the building. "And don't move unless I tell you to." Marcus didn't say anything, but he understood. He crouched down inside the closet, trying to keep as still as possible. He couldn't help but feel a sense of awe and fear. The woman, Kayla, was unlike anyone he had ever met. There was a strength in her that he could almost feel, and yet there was something else, something hidden deep beneath the surface. He could see it in her eyes. She was alone in this world, just as he had been for a long time. The next few moments felt like an eternity. Kayla's heart pounded in her chest as she listened to the bounty hunters getting closer. She had been in tight spots before, but this felt different. She had always been able to rely on her training and instincts, but now she found herself relying on someone else, someone she barely knew. She could hear the bounty hunters now, their voices growing louder as they approached her room. They were just outside the door. Kayla took a deep breath, her hand gripping the weapon at her side. She wasn't afraid to fight. She had killed before, and she would kill again if she had to. But she wasn't stupid. If she started a fight now, she would risk drawing too much attention. She needed to get out, quietly, quickly. She turned to Marcus, her eyes narrowing. "Stay hidden. Do exactly what I say, and you'll make it out of here alive." Marcus gave her a nod, his hands clenched tightly at his sides. He had no idea how he could help her, but he didn't want to be a burden. All he knew was that he couldn't let her down. She was the only person who had ever offered him a way out of his lonely, broken life. The door creaked open. Kayla tensed, her fingers tightening around her weapon. But then, something strange happened. The bounty hunters didn't burst in. Instead, they paused, their voices growing distant. Kayla's mind raced. What were they doing? She took a quick glance over her shoulder at Marcus, who was still hiding in the closet. She had no idea how long the bounty hunters would stay distracted, but she couldn't risk waiting around for too long. She moved quickly, slipping to the side of the room, positioning herself behind the door. Her body was tense, every muscle ready to react. She had faced many challenges, but none quite like this. The stakes had never been higher. Seconds passed, then minutes. It felt like a lifetime before she heard the footsteps of the bounty hunters moving away from the door. She waited for just a moment longer, her heart racing, before she quietly eased the door open and peeked outside. The hallway was empty. The bounty hunters had moved on. Kayla let out a breath she hadn't realized she had been holding. She was safe, for now. But she couldn't stay in this building forever. She needed a plan, and she needed it fast. She turned to Marcus, who had slowly emerged from the closet. His face was pale, but he was alive. He looked at her, uncertainty still in his eyes. "Where do we go now?" Marcus asked quietly. Kayla didn't answer right away. She moved toward the window again, scanning the streets below. The bounty hunters could be back at any moment. She needed to get out of here, but she couldn't do it alone. The strange feeling she had been trying to ignore was growing stronger. Marcus wasn't just a stranger anymore. He was an ally, whether she liked it or not. "I know a place," Kayla said, her voice steady, "but it's risky. We can't stay here." Marcus nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. He didn't know where they were going or what would happen next, but one thing was clear: his life, and possibly Kayla's, was now tied to this strange woman in ways he didn't fully understand. Kayla moved toward the door, motioning for Marcus to follow her. The bounty hunters might have given up for now, but the chase wasn't over. The real danger was just beginning. Kayla's heart raced as she heard the door being knocked on. She had been through countless close calls before, but something about this moment felt different. The shadows outside the window weren't just ordinary enemies. They were coming for her. The galaxy had never been kind to her, but today it seemed to be turning against her all at once. Her hand tightened around the handle of the weapon she had taken from her bag. She had faced many threats in her career, but none had ever felt so personal. Whoever was outside didn't just want her dead. They wanted to destroy everything she had worked for. In a swift motion, Kayla moved toward the window. Her body was as silent as the night itself. She peered through the glass, her sharp eyes scanning the darkness. A group of figures emerged from the shadows, cloaked in black. They were armed, no doubt about it. Bounty hunters. The name flashed through her mind, sending a chill down her spine. She knew the dangers of bounty hunters. They would do anything to capture her, alive or dead. Kayla moved silently, preparing to face them head-on. But as she stepped away from the window and turned to gather her things, something unexpected happened. The door creaked open. She didn't hesitate. In a flash, she lunged forward, weapon in hand, only to stop mid-step when she saw who stood in the doorway. A man, an earthling, looked at her, his eyes wide with surprise, but not fear. He wasn't armed. He didn't even seem to be here for a fight. For a moment, Kayla froze, her weapon aimed directly at his chest. She studied him for a second, taking in his ragged clothes, his unshaven face, and his wide, curious eyes. There was something different about him. He wasn't like the others she had encountered throughout her life. The soldiers, the criminals, the assassins. There was no coldness in his eyes. He didn't look like he had come to kill. "Who are you?" Kayla asked, her voice low and demanding. The man hesitated, glancing at her weapon but not flinching. "I'm Marcus," he said simply. "I live here." Kayla's mind raced. This wasn't a trap. She knew traps well, and this didn't feel like one. But who was this man, and why had he opened the door to her, a fugitive on the run? "I didn't mean to interrupt," Marcus continued, raising his hands in a peaceful gesture. "I just heard the noise. Are you all right?" Kayla lowered her weapon slightly, still not fully trusting him. He wasn't acting like the bounty hunters she was used to, but something about him felt strange. She could sense his fear, but it wasn't the kind of fear that made someone dangerous. It was the kind of fear that came from not understanding the world they were dealing with. "I don't need help," she said coldly, keeping her distance. But Marcus didn't back away. He didn't cower. Instead, he glanced behind him, as if expecting someone else to be there. When he turned back to face her, his voice softened. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said. "I can help if you need it." Kayla's eyes narrowed. She had learned long ago never to trust anyone who offered help without a reason. But there was something in his words, in the way he spoke, that made her hesitate. She had no reason to believe him, yet she couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't like the others. Before she could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hall. The bounty hunters were getting closer. She knew that in a few moments, they would be on her. The room she was in wouldn't be enough to escape from them. She would have to act fast, but the man, Marcus, was still standing there, blocking her exit. For a split second, Kayla considered taking him down, clearing the way to freedom. But she stopped herself. She couldn't explain why, but she didn't want to hurt him. The hesitation confused her. Was it because he seemed so ordinary, so human? Or was there something else, something she had never felt before? "Get out of the way," she commanded. But Marcus didn't move. Instead, he took a step forward, his eyes serious now. "If you're in trouble, I'll help," he said, his voice steady. Kayla took a deep breath. There was no time to waste. The bounty hunters were almost here. She knew she needed to make a decision. Without warning, she grabbed Marcus by the arm and pulled him inside the room, slamming the door shut behind them. The sound of footsteps grew louder as she quickly moved to the window, peering out again. The bounty hunters had reached the door of the building. They were moving fast. Marcus, who had been thrown off balance by her sudden action, steadied himself and looked at her. "What's going on? Who are they?" Kayla didn't answer. Instead, she moved to the small corner of the room and began quickly packing her things. The situation was growing more dangerous by the second, but for some reason, Marcus had managed to distract her. She was no longer thinking only of survival. A strange feeling was growing inside her, a feeling that perhaps, just perhaps, she wasn't alone anymore. As the bounty hunters outside began to search the building, Kayla took a final glance at Marcus. She didn't trust him. She couldn't afford to. But in that moment, she realized she might just need him. And that thought was more unsettling than anything the bounty hunters could throw at her. Kayla moved quickly, her footsteps light but purposeful as she led Marcus down the narrow hallway of the old building. The air was thick with tension, and every creak of the floorboards made her nerves tighten. The bounty hunters could be anywhere, and she knew they wouldn't give up easily. But she had no choice. They had to escape. Marcus followed closely behind, his breath shallow and fast. His heart raced as he tried to keep up with Kayla, but the fear was overwhelming. He had never been in a situation like this before. It felt like everything around him was spinning out of control. One moment, he was just an ordinary man, going about his life. The next, he was running for his life with a woman who seemed to have the strength of a warrior. He didn't know what he had gotten himself into, but he wasn't about to back out now. "We need to stay quiet," Kayla whispered, glancing over her shoulder. "If they hear us, it's over." Marcus nodded, his eyes wide. He had been silent ever since the bounty hunters came into the building, too shocked to say anything. Now he had no choice but to trust Kayla. She was the only one who seemed to know what to do. They reached the back door, and Kayla stopped, peering out through a small crack in the wood. The street outside was empty, but Kayla didn't relax. She had learned long ago not to trust appearances. It was all too easy for enemies to hide in plain sight. "We have to move fast," she muttered, scanning the alleyway. They might have set up a perimeter. Marcus couldn't help but wonder how she knew so much. She had acted like a woman on a mission, someone who had been in dangerous situations before, but he wasn't about to ask. Not now. Kayla opened the door slowly, just enough for them to slip through. She motioned for Marcus to follow her, and he did, stepping into the cool night air. The sounds of the city buzzed around them, distant and muffled. They weren't out of danger yet. Kayla led him down a narrow alley, her sharp eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. She had been in tight spots before, but this was different. She wasn't just trying to escape, she was trying to survive. And now, with Marcus at her side, survival meant more than ever. He wasn't just a bystander in this. He was now a part of her plan, whether he liked it or not. As they turned a corner, Kayla halted, her hand raised. She had heard something. A sound, low and almost imperceptible. Marcus tensed, his mind racing. Was it the bounty hunters? Were they already on their tail? Kayla motioned for him to stay still. She crouched low and moved toward the source of the sound. Marcus did his best to stay hidden, his back pressed against the cold brick wall of the building. His heart beat loudly in his chest, and every sound around him seemed to echo in his ears. Kayla reached the corner and peeked around it. What she saw made her pause. There, standing in the shadows, was a man. His face was hidden under a hood, but Kayla knew he wasn't a bounty hunter. No one who hunted humans would move so quietly, so deliberately. He was a different kind of danger. The man looked down the alleyway, but didn't seem to notice Kayla or Marcus. He turned and started to walk toward them, his footsteps light but measured. Kayla's instincts kicked in. She had to act before he got too close. She signaled to Marcus to follow her, and they quickly moved into a small doorway. They crouched down, holding their breath as the man passed by, just inches away. Kayla could feel the adrenaline coursing through her veins, and she knew they couldn't stay hidden for long. As soon as the man was out of sight, they would have to move. Marcus's breathing was erratic, and he could feel the sweat on his palms. The man had been so close. His heart was still pounding in his chest, but he knew better than to make a sound. He had to trust Kayla. She was in control, and that was the only reason he was still alive. The man continued down the alley, oblivious to their presence. Kayla waited a moment longer before motioning for Marcus to follow her again. They moved quickly but carefully, trying to stay out of sight. They reached another street corner, and Kayla stopped to check the area. The coast seemed clear. For now. "We need to find shelter," Kayla said, her voice steady despite the danger. "There's a safe house nearby. It's the only place we'll be safe for the night." Marcus nodded, his mind still reeling. How could he possibly help her? He was just a regular man, thrown into this world of danger and violence. But in that moment, he understood something. Kayla wasn't just running from her past. She was running for something else, something bigger than herself. They continued their journey through the darkened streets, their footsteps the only sound in the night. The world outside seemed so quiet, so peaceful, but Marcus knew it was only an illusion. The danger was still out there, lurking, waiting for the right moment to strike. Kayla led him down another alley, and Marcus couldn't help but wonder just how many safe houses she had in this city. It was clear that she had been here before, that she knew this world and the risks it held. They arrived at a small, unmarked door, tucked away in a corner of a seemingly empty building. Kayla knocked twice, quick, sharp taps, and waited. A moment later, the door creaked open, and a man with a stern expression greeted them. "This is the one," Kayla said quietly, stepping inside. Marcus followed her, still unsure of what was happening. All he knew was that Kayla was the only person who seemed to know what to do. And in this dangerous world, that made her his only hope. The door closed behind them, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Marcus allowed himself to relax. But Kayla didn't. She stood tense, her eyes scanning the room as if expecting someone to burst in at any moment. "We'll be safe for now," Kayla said, her voice low. "But this is only the beginning." The small, dimly lit room was quiet except for the soft rustling of Kayla's movements. She paced back and forth, her eyes constantly scanning every corner. The safe house was nothing more than an abandoned building, one of many Kayla had used in the past. It wasn't much, but it was enough to hide from the people chasing them. Marcus sat at a small, dusty table in the corner, still trying to make sense of everything that had happened. His mind was racing. One moment, he was an ordinary man, living his life. And now he was caught in a dangerous world he couldn't understand. All he knew was that Kayla had saved him. And somehow, she was the key to getting out of this mess. Kayla turned to him, her expression serious but calm. "We need to keep moving. They won't stop looking for us, and every second we waste is another chance for them to find us." Marcus nodded, still feeling overwhelmed. "But how did you know about all of this? How do you know what to do?" Kayla paused for a moment, her eyes distant. She didn't want to get into her past, not yet. It was too painful, but Marcus needed to understand. "I've been on the run for a long time," Kayla said quietly. "I've had to survive in ways most people can't even imagine. The galaxy is a dangerous place, and not everyone you meet is your friend." Marcus blinked. "You were an assassin, right? They said you were the most feared one in the galaxy." Kayla's gaze hardened, her jaw tightening. "That's in the past. I was forced into it, and it nearly destroyed me." She shook her head, looking away. "But I've made choices since then. Choices that matter. You don't need to worry about that." Marcus didn't press. He could see the pain in her eyes, the weight of the past that she carried. It was clear that Kayla had lived a life that was nothing like his own. But for some reason, she had chosen to protect him. And in that moment, that was all that mattered. Before he could say anything else, the door creaked open, and the man who had let them inside earlier stepped into the room. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a sharp gaze that seemed to miss nothing. His name was Ryan, and he was one of Kayla's few trusted contacts. "We've got trouble," Ryan said, his voice low and urgent. "The bounty hunters are closing in. They've already started questioning people in the area. It won't be long before they find out where you are." Kayla straightened, her body tense. "How long do we have?" "Not long," Ryan replied, his face grim. "Maybe an hour at best." Kayla nodded, her mind already working, calculating their options. "All right, we need to leave now. Ryan, you'll help us get out of the city, right?" Ryan didn't hesitate. "I'll get you to the edge of town, but after that, you're on your own. You'll have to make it the rest of the way." Kayla turned to Marcus. "We're leaving. Now, there's no time to waste." Marcus stood up, his legs still a little shaky from the stress of the past few hours. He couldn't believe how fast things had escalated. One moment, he had been in his apartment, and now he was running from bounty hunters with an assassin who seemed to know everyone in the underworld. Ryan led the way through the narrow hallways of the safe house, and Kayla followed closely behind Marcus. They moved quickly, keeping their steps light and quiet, as though they were ghosts slipping through the building. Every corner was a potential danger, and Kayla's sharp senses were always on alert. She couldn't afford to let her guard down, not for a second. They reached the back door, and Ryan opened it just a crack, peering outside to make sure the coast was clear. The alley beyond was dark, but the faint sounds of the city echoed in the distance. It was too quiet, and that made Kayla uneasy. There was no telling who could be lurking around the corner, waiting for them to make a mistake. "This way," Ryan said, motioning for them to follow. They stepped out into the alley, and Kayla immediately scanned the surroundings. They had to move fast. She didn't trust anyone, and Ryan's help was only temporary. Once they reached the outskirts of the city, they would be on their own again. As they walked, Marcus couldn't help but notice how Kayla moved. She was so confident, so aware of everything around her. She seemed to anticipate every turn, every movement, like she had eyes everywhere. It was as though the world was her battlefield, and she had already planned every step. "You're not like anyone I've ever met," Marcus said quietly. Kayla glanced at him, a flicker of something in her eyes. "I've had to survive in ways most people can't understand. The universe isn't kind to people like me. But I'm not asking for your sympathy. I'm not offering it," Marcus replied, his voice steady. I don't know how you do it. How do you keep going, even after everything you've been through?" Kayla didn't answer right away. Instead, she gave him a hard look, her eyes studying him as if trying to read his thoughts. Finally, she spoke. "You keep going because you have no choice. The moment you stop fighting, You lose, and I'm not ready to lose. Marcus could see the resolve in her eyes, the determination that drove her. It was the same fire that had led her to protect him, even when it put her own life in danger. And for the first time, Marcus understood. He didn't have to know everything about her past to know that Kayla was a fighter. And now, he had to be one too. They continued down the alley, the weight of the night settling over them. Every step took them further from the danger. But Kayla knew they couldn't outrun it forever. She had made enemies who wouldn't rest until she was dead. But as long as she had Marcus by her side, she wasn't going to let them win. The air was thick with tension as Kayla, Marcus, and Ryan navigated through the dark alleyways. Every sound seemed amplified. Each distant footstep, each creak of the old buildings, was a reminder that they were being hunted. The bounty hunters were closing in, and time was running out. Kayla's sharp eyes darted around, scanning every shadow, every movement. Her instincts were on high alert, the years of being a fugitive giving her a heightened awareness of danger. But this time, it wasn't just her life on the line. Marcus was with her. The one person who had shown her kindness, even when it was the last thing he should have done. As they rounded a corner, Ryan stopped and raised a hand. "We're almost there," he whispered. "There's a safe house up ahead. We can rest there for a while, gather our thoughts. But it won't be long before the hunters catch up." Kayla nodded, her face set in determination. "We'll have to be quick. Once we get to the safe house, we move again. We can't risk staying in one place for too long." Marcus's heart was pounding in his chest. His mind raced with 1,000 questions. Why had Kayla saved him? Why was she risking so much for someone like him? A simple human with no skills in fighting or surviving. He didn't understand, but he couldn't deny that he felt a strange sense of loyalty to her now. She had become his protector, and he would do anything to help her. As they reached the entrance to the safe house, Kayla motioned for Marcus to stay close to her. She knew that the next few minutes were crucial. The building was old and abandoned, just like the others they'd used. But this time, they couldn't afford any mistakes. "Stay low," Kayla murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "We'll move quickly. No noise." The door creaked open, and they stepped inside, the smell of dust and old wood filling their lungs. Inside, the room was dimly lit, but it was enough for Kayla to make out the layout. There was a staircase leading up to the second floor, and she made her way toward it, signaling Marcus and Ryan to follow. "Upstairs," Kayla said quietly. "We'll hide out until the heat dies down." They moved swiftly, with Kayla leading the way. As they ascended the stairs, Ryan turned to Kayla. "You sure this is the best place to lay low? The hunters are getting smarter. They won't stop until they find you." Kayla's eyes narrowed. "I know them, and I know they won't stop, but this is our best shot." Marcus glanced at her. "You've been running from them for a long time, haven't you?" Kayla didn't respond right away. The memories were too painful. She had been on the run since the day she turned her back on her old life, a life where she was nothing more than a weapon, an assassin feared across the galaxy. But she had chosen a different path, one that led her to protect the innocent, to protect Marcus. They reached the second floor, and Kayla immediately scanned the room. It was small and empty, with only a few old crates and a dusty chair in the corner. Perfect for what they needed. "We'll stay here for the night," Kayla said, setting down her bag. "We'll move again at dawn." Marcus sat down on the floor, trying to catch his breath. His body was sore from all the running, and his mind was exhausted from the constant fear. But he couldn't stop thinking about Kayla. There was so much about her that he didn't understand. But the more time he spent with her, the more he realized just how much he admired her strength. Ryan, however, didn't seem as hopeful. "I don't like this. The hunters are closing in fast. If they find us here, we'll be trapped." Kayla looked at him. "You know the risks. We don't have a choice. If we move again, they'll just track us down. We need to be strategic. Ryan nodded reluctantly, though his expression remained tense. "I'll keep watch downstairs. You two get some rest. We'll figure out what to do next in the morning." Kayla didn't argue. She was used to being the one who did everything herself, but now she had Marcus with her. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to feel a sense of trust. She sat down beside him, leaning against the wall. "How long have you been running?" Marcus asked, breaking the silence. Kayla's eyes flickered, and for a brief moment, a shadow passed across her face. "Too long," she replied quietly. "It feels like a lifetime, but I'm not going back. I refuse to be that person again." Marcus looked at her, his voice soft. "I don't know what it's like to be hunted, but I understand what it feels like to be trapped, to feel like there's no way out." Kayla glanced at him, her gaze steady. "You don't have to understand. You just have to survive." They sat in silence for a while, both lost in their thoughts. Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. The bounty hunters were getting closer, and sooner or later, they would find them. Kayla had spent her life fighting to stay alive, but this was different. This time, she wasn't just fighting for herself. As the night stretched on, the tension in the room grew. The only sound was the soft, rhythmic breathing of Marcus and Kayla. She had to make sure he stayed safe. She couldn't let them catch him. Not after everything they had been through. The sun was barely rising, casting long shadows across the cracked walls of the safe house. Kayla stood by the window, her eyes scanning the horizon. She could feel the tension in the air, thick and heavy. Today was the day everything would change. Today, she would either escape for good or face the consequences of her past. Marcus sat on the floor, his arms crossed as he tried to calm his racing thoughts. He could sense Kayla's unease, even though she tried to hide it. He had never seen anyone like her, so strong, so determined, yet so burdened by the weight of her past. Ryan paced back and forth, his impatience growing. "They're getting closer," he muttered. "We don't have much time. We need to move." Kayla nodded without turning away from the window. "I know, but we're not running anymore." Marcus looked up, confused. "What do you mean? If we don't move, they'll find us." Kayla's voice was steady, but there was a fire in her eyes. "I'm not running anymore. I'm going to face them." Ryan stopped pacing, his eyes narrowing. "You're planning to fight. Do you know what they're capable of? You can't take them all on by yourself." Kayla turned to face him, her expression unwavering. "I'm not alone anymore. I have you both." Marcus felt a surge of determination rise in him. He didn't know if he was ready for this, but he couldn't let Kayla face it alone. She had protected him time and time again. Now it was his turn to stand by her. "We'll face them together," Marcus said, his voice firm. Kayla smiled faintly, a rare softness in her eyes. "You're braver than you realize, Marcus." They gathered their things in silence, the weight of what they were about to do settling in. Kayla knew that there was no turning back. The bounty hunters were relentless, and this time, she would confront them head-on. She wasn't going to let her past define her anymore. As they left the safe house, they moved swiftly through the narrow streets. Kayla led the way, her senses on high alert. The city was still waking up, and there was no sign of the hunters yet. But Kayla knew they were close. They always were. They reached a small square, a place Kayla knew well. It was quiet, empty, and perfect for what they had to do. She turned to Ryan. "You take the left side. Marcus, stay with me. When they come, we'll have to move quickly." Ryan nodded and moved into position. Kayla took a deep breath, steadying herself. Her heart pounded in her chest, but this time, it wasn't fear, it was resolve. Suddenly, the silence was shattered by the sound of boots on pavement. A group of bounty hunters appeared at the far end of the square, their figures dark against the morning light. Kayla could see the unmistakable signs of their armor, sleek, deadly, and efficient. They had come for her. She didn't hesitate. "Now," she shouted. Kayla and Marcus darted into the cover of a nearby building, Ryan already taking out the first two hunters with precise shots. Kayla's pulse quickened and her training kicked in. She had spent years running, hiding, but now she was fighting. Fighting for herself. Fighting for Marcus. The hunters responded quickly, moving with the precision of well-trained soldiers. But Kayla was faster. She leaped from cover, using her agility to outmaneuver them. She took out one hunter with a swift kick to the chest, sending him crashing to the ground. Another tried to grab her, but she twisted out of his grasp, using his own momentum to throw him into a wall. Marcus watched in awe. He had never seen Kayla fight like this before. She was like a force of nature, unstoppable, relentless. He couldn't help but feel a sense of admiration for her strength. He stayed close, doing his best to help. He wasn't a soldier, but he knew he had to contribute. He grabbed a nearby metal pipe and swung it at one of the hunters, knocking him off balance. The hunter turned, his eyes narrowing as he lunged at Marcus. But Kayla was there in an instant, taking the hunter down with a quick strike. Together, they fought, each move bringing them closer to victory. But the hunters were relentless, and Kayla knew that they couldn't keep this up forever. They had to finish this now. As the last of the hunters fell, Kayla took a deep breath, her muscles aching from the fight. She wiped the sweat from her brow and turned to Marcus, her eyes filled with gratitude. "We did it." Marcus's heart was still racing, but he smiled. "Yeah, we did." Ryan stepped forward, his expression grim. "That's not all of them. More will be on their way. We need to move now." Kayla nodded, knowing that Ryan was right. This wasn't over yet. The bounty hunters would keep coming. But for the first time in a long time, Kayla felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Hope. She turned to Marcus, her eyes soft. "Thank you for standing by me." Marcus looked back at her, his smile warm. "You don't have to thank me. We're in this together." They didn't know what the future held, but for now, they had won. And that was enough. As they disappeared into the streets, ready to face whatever came next, Kayla knew one thing for sure. She wasn't running anymore. She had found something worth fighting for.